Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
Whitetail Rendezvous and Strike Force Energy have joined together. What have they joined together to do? Well, they joined together to help you kick the can. That's right. Strike Force Energy is the fastest growing new energy drink on Amazon today. It's simple. All you do is rip, drip, and sip. That's it. No sugar, no crash, no calories. It gives you the ability to focus and stay in the stand, stay on the hunt all day long without carrying around a can. When I get a sample pack, simply go to strikeforceenergy.com, put in WR free, and you'll get a 4-count sample pack from Strike Force Energy. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and we're heading down to Kentucky today. We're going to check in with Alex Burke, and Alex and his brother, they've been pulling some pretty darn nice bucks off what they're calling the Golden Triangle on the Ohio River. So, Alex, welcome to the show, and I'm glad we connected on Instagram.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having the patience.
Well, it's all good, Alex. And in a warm-up, we were talking about what you're doing at school. And, folks, here's a young man that was playing college baseball and decided to switch up to trade school. Why'd you do that?
Well, my twin brother and I had always had a thing for aircraft. My dad actually used to work on 747 flight simulators. So by the time we were 11 years old, we knew how to fly. Would have been a 747 Boeing. But if you ask me now, I wouldn't know off the top of my head how to work the thing. So that kind of always put it in the back of my head there. When I was playing college ball, I had a love for the game. I've played it since I was old enough to hold a bat. My dad being my coach, my brother playing alongside me. I decided to give it up because I switched from business school to trade school, and basically any trade school is not going to offer a sport. So it was either play baseball or pursue what I wanted to do.
Now, I've heard that a lot of guys and gals are going to trade schools because they go out, they're making $80,000, $100,000 a year, and they just go and take care of business. Is that kind of what you hear?
Yes, sir. Actually, aviation, if you're looking to get into it, now is the time to get into it. There's a large shortage in almost any trade out there now, but aviation is very lacking in mechanical side and the piloting side of the trade.
Why is that?
Actually, the generations now, for the most part, are convinced that they have to go to 4 years of college to do any good in a career. Well, trade school is a bit of a loophole for that, if you could say.
Because you pay a bunch of money to go to trade school. It ain't cheap.
It's not cheap, but I have friends that go to, say, Eastern Kentucky or Louisville or Kentucky, and they pay several thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they wind up in debt. What I have now is a state-funded scholarship that funds every bit of my education. So I've been fortunate enough to come out of this debt-free. I have yet to owe a cent to any school.
Wow. So you must have been pretty good if you got a full ride up in Illinois for baseball, and then the state's paying that. So, folks, I wanted to get in this a little bit because sometimes people think, oh, I got to go to college. I got to go to college. That's not true. And don't let your parents get mad at me, but that's not true. Yeah, I went to college, got a degree, played football, ran track, had a great time in college. And did it help me in my career? I don't know. I followed it up with an MBA. That certainly helped me. But I know guys that are making as much money or more money than I made in trades. There's no question about it. And I'm going, holy fright. But back in the day that I was going to school, that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at all. But today, folks, if you're young, thinking about this and saying, I don't know if I want to go to college or not, they're going to give you a full ride, go to college, get an education, come out of that, then go to trade school and go and make some money so you can go hunt and fish any place you want.
That's the idea.
That's the idea. You know, things have changed, folks. And recent events where people are paying money and bribing people to go to elite colleges, I don't understand that at all. I'll leave that where it is. I just don't understand that. You're not teaching anything.
What dumbfounds me is people who will go and spend several thousands of dollars to go to school, but come out with, say, an art degree and make maybe $40,000 a year. If you're going to spend the money for the education, you might as well spend it on something that you're going to come out with a great degree and you're actually going to make halfway decent money.
If they want to. If you're a writer, if you're an artist, and you know that unless you make it big time, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 is basically what you're going to get, then you go in with your eyes open. Some people want to pursue an education because that's what they feel they want to do, and hats off to them. You and me, Alex, I like to hunt. I like to fish. That costs a lot of money.
I'd like to get all the money that I've spent on fishing tackle alone. I'd like to get that back.
Well, we got a few years behind you. My wife every once in a while reminds me, and she said, if we had all your hunting and fishing gear and trips and blah, 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 we'd have a couple of bucks. I said, yeah, but I wouldn't be who I was, and I wouldn't have had all the fun and go all the places I've gone. And I haven't lived life. I guess that's the biggest thing. Hunting to me, I did a podcast last year with a bunch of people, why we hunt. Why I hunt is the journey, to go places that other people won't, to get up on mountains where other people won't, to ride horses where other people won't, to mix it up with wolves and grizzly bears where other people won't.
You are very right, Bruce. That's
the adventure.
Right.
That's
you
the adventure,
be the person you are today.
Yeah, that made me who I am today. Right, wrong, and different. And so we're not a little off. This is a podcast. Whitetail Rendezvous is about adventures in whitetail hunting. But Alex, not so unique person today for choosing trade school over college baseball and a 4-year degree. So enough on that. Let's talk about your hunting tradition. How did you start getting into hunting?
My father and myself and my twin brother, Sean, basically we started fishing before we started hunting, of course, because we were big enough to hold a fishing pole well before a rifle or a bow for that matter. So we started going to ponds. My dad, of course, we would watch him bass fish because at the time we didn't necessarily have the casting capability. We'd watch him bass fish and we'd watch him catch left and right and try to convince him to, hey, teach us. He would always turn it down because I'm not going to babysit somebody. I'm catching fish. I understand those now. I would do the same thing. But we were bluegill fishing, started out. We moved on to bass fishing, catfishing. I'm an avid bass fisherman now. I love the lakes. I love ponds. Farm ponds produce some very nice fish, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
Are you on the tournament circuit?
No, sir. I'm completely recreational.
Because there's big money in that. I mean, it's hard to break into, but the good guys are making really good money.
Some of the guys that I hang out with, one of them fishes for, he's on the Kentucky bass fishing team. And the other one's on Western Kentucky's bass fishing team. I go out to the lakes with them and spend some time with them, learn a few things, but that's about it. My stuff is usually just recreational.
Are you catch and release, or you're eating some of those bass?
I don't eat them if I pull them out of a pond. Most of the time it's catch and release. If I'm at, say, Lake Cumberland, then I'll keep just about anything. Smallmouth, striper.
Just because of the water quality?
Water quality, fish size.
So you started fishing hard, and then when did hunting come up on the radar?
Hunting came up when I was about 8 years old is when I killed my first deer. But I went hunting before then. I was about 6 years old sitting in a stand with my dad. I watched him kill deer. I would spot deer for him. At one point, I remember actually we sat in 2 different stands and I spotted the very deer that he harvested. And then a coyote about 15 minutes later. Fell in love with it. Finally, I got to hold a rifle and go to get my own for the first time. I got a 164 scored 10-point. Can't tell you what he weighed.
Your first deer? No.
Yes, sir.
You're spoiled. Were spoiled.
No, sir. My dad managed that property, and I'm just very, very fortunate for the work that he's put into it. He came along that property long before we did. So long before we were there. So
before QDMA was popular or was up and running?
He started about 17 years ago.
Okay.
So we were too young to go at the time whenever he first got it. By the time we were old enough for him to trust us in a deer stand, then we started heading out there. Anyway, when I was 8 years old, that's when I harvested my first buck. It's still, there's no feeling like your first buck fever. No feeling. I was shaking. I mean, everybody knows the sensation.
I still get it now.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one reason I still hunt, because it's incredible when I'm covered up with deer, and they're, especially during a rut. I mean, anything can happen. And last year it did happen. And I was caught up for 4 bucks chasing one doe, and it was just unbelievable. and I shoot a crossbow. And so it was like, holy, right. I didn't shoot anything, but it was exciting.
Do you mostly crossbow hunt?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I've actually never personally carried a crossbow in the woods.
Yeah, they're good. You can get very proficient myself out to 80 yards.
Good range.
From the right rest. 50 yards is basically a chip shot. Everything else being equal. They're so accurate today. And they got some Ravens that I know guys continually shoot 100 yards with that. They're extremely accurate, and they have a place just like shotguns and muzzleloaders or rifles. And I went to a crossbow simply because I can't pull back a compound anymore. I've got 2 pins in my shoulder. So I was done. So I moved over to a crossbow. I shoot caliber crossbows.
I personally shoot a compound. I shoot Hoyt.
And I would be shooting a compound now if I could, but I can't. So
the pins.
Yep. And I got Colorado. I live in Colorado, so I have a lifetime crossbow use during the archery season.
Wow. What day does your season start? Is it just like it would be here in Kentucky? It's usually middle of November for us.
Well, deer, I don't hunt whitetails in Colorado. Couple of reasons. One, all the deer tags are limited tags for mule deer. And then whitetails in specific areas, there's a lot of whitetails here that are along all the river drainages. And there is some public land, but it's really hard to DIY the public land. And out eastern Colorado, you can pay up to $8,000 just to get on a farm, and with river bottoms or with good quality whitetails. So I don't hunt Colorado at all. I've been told that there's some places if you know how to do it, but where I live, I just haven't put in the time to figure it out, because during the fall, my fall runs, I start elk hunting really early. It's Labor Day weekend, so it might be the 28th, 29th, September 1st, someplace in there. I'll get up in the high country, 10,000 feet, and I'll hunt elk for the first part of the season. Then I'll go back after the full moon in September. Then I'll hunt another 5 days. So I'll get about 10 days. Let's just call it 10 days of elk hunting with my crossbow.
Excellent. I'd love to take an elk.
Yeah, and it's very similar. I remember the first elk hunt I went on and talking to a number of people, and the guys from Wisconsin are really good elk hunters because they know how to hunt whitetails, and they're very similar, except hellacious, where you have 100 acres, elk have 10,000 acres.
Right. They can scale everything.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of elk hunting is finding them. Once you find them, then if you're a hunter, you can close the deal. Or have adventures like we talked about earlier, elk 10 yards away and you can't get a shot. I mean, bull elk, cow elk streaming by you, just like does will stream by you. There's a bull coming. It's amazing. Once they start lighting up, and bugle and stuff, that's a whole new game.
It's like the interaction you get with a turkey, but on a whole different scale.
It's a whole different, and I've known some really good turkey callers and such, and they said they love turkey calling because it reminds them of elk hunting, because you get to respond and communicate.
I love the interaction back and forth between you and the animal.
Well, and one thing that I've learned over the last 4 years with whitetail rendezvous, there's a lot of deer vocalization that we don't know about or we don't hear because we don't spend the right time in the right places. Everybody knows about rattling, but in grunt tubing, snort wheezing, and all the different vocalizations, but they're not as loud, and so you don't hear them. I mean, you could have bucks grunting and tending grunts and stuff like that, and you won't hear them if the wind's wrong. So in my upcoming Deer Hunting Institute, I'm going to be talking about vocalization. Tell me about your experience with deer talk.
I've actually personally never rattled. I have grunted and snort wheezed, and I've been snort wheezed at. I was actually, the first time I'd been snort wheezed at, I had gotten ready to climb out of a stand. It just got dark, and I heard walking around. And my father was actually with me. I snort wheezed, and we had that deer stomping around looking for us for a solid 15 minutes before we could get out of that stand. Was
it a deer? Was it a buck or a doe?
It was a buck. Do you know have you heard of snort wheeze? Yes, sir. Yeah, he was ready to fight. It was an 8-point that we had seen just before sun went down. So it was the same deer.
Yeah, it's a dominance thing. It's a challenge response. And it's like, who are you? What are you doing here? And it's communication.
The second time, this is actually where it escalates. I had got out of a stand right on the river. I'm just on the side of the river, and I'm on this grassy knoll is what we call it. And I climb out of the stand. We have a road cut out in the bottom that goes all the way from the river all the way to the bottom of the hill. And the road goes up the hill to where we park our vehicles and the four-wheeler at a barn. And, I step onto that road and I take off walking, turn on my flashlight, and a buck jumps across tall grass, jumps and clears the road and takes off running and goes just halfway up the side of the hill. And I snort wheezed at him. Well, he came stomping right back down, and I heard him crashing towards me. Ran over next to a tree, knelt down, actually had the flashlight on the side of the rifle, ready to shoot anything I saw moving. Don't do that, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, that's why we hunt. It's an invention.
But
Sure.
I was about 14 years old at the time, and it was a very dumb thing for me to do.
Yeah, well, that's how you learn. The experience is the best teacher. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was just one of those situations I didn't take as serious as I should have, and I learned.
Now, do you like to rifle hunt more than bow hunt, or what you thinking?
With the density of trees that we have in some areas, there's particular areas that you can bow hunt and can only rifle hunt in my property.
Because of the terrain and the foliage and everything, you just can't.
It's a tree farm, and some of the areas are wild, and it's very, very thick stuff. But I prefer archery more than anything. I've taken almost half my deer with a bow. I feel like the rush that you get off of killing a deer with a bow is just much more than that of a rifle. There's more challenge to it with a bow.
I would agree. And typically they're up close and personal. Archery tackle today, or archery gear today, has extended the range significantly. A traditional archer, 20, 30 yards is max for 99% of the traditional archers. And that's really close. This fall, I had deer at 10 feet and they were moving. So there was no shot opportunity. But with a bow in the woods, typically, if you right setup, 30 to 40 yards maybe. You get on a bean field, you get on wheat or corn or something like that, then you might have a little longer shot. Just how you're hunting with decoys, there's a lot of variables in there.
Very cool thing I figured out just a couple of years ago. By the way, for those people that hunt fields and tend to see deer at night, but not in the day whenever you're in the stand, around 1st of October, I figured out is when the acorns drop. So they leave the fields for cover and food rather than standing in the open to have food. So they're going to be found in the woods more so than in the fields.
Hey, whitetail hunters, we're on the lookout for some great whitetail rendezvous success stories. If you listen to 1 or 100 Whitetail Rendezvous podcasts and learned an insight from an episode that upped your confidence or success while hunting whitetails, and you feel your story is something that other hunters could learn from, we'd love for you to share your story. If you're interested in sharing your story, let me know by sending me an email to whitetailrendezvous@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Just message me there and I'll get in touch. Again, please send me an email to whitetailrendezvous.com and I'll contact you. We'll be sharing your story with all of the Whitetail Rendezvous community. And just wait. For the first 40 hunters that share their story, there'll be a surprise bonus for each of you. It's our way of saying thanks for helping the other hunters in the Whitetail Rendezvous community to be more successful this fall. Stay tuned for some exciting things coming from Whitetail Rendezvous this year. And that's true. And that's just like the pattern deer, July, August. Then all of a sudden September hits. And in my opinion, as soon as their horns harden, the velvet comes off, horns harden, that's when the rut begins. That's when dominance begins. All the different things that happen in dynamics of your deer herd, that's when it begins. So, the rut is the breeding season. The actual rut is the breeding season. But their behavior starts changing. And because they don't want to be around other deer when the velvet's coming off, their horns are still soft, so they kind of stay away. And they're changing up to different food groups now because they know what's coming. And you have to really study this and look for deer and not hunt them sometimes, but try to find out where they're coming out, where they're going. And if you got a great mass crop, then that's where they're going to be. Valid point that people say, well, the deer aren't coming out to the beans anymore. No, because they're eating acorns because they get better protein and they know at this time of year that's the best food source that they can eat.
That's right. Best thing out there for them at the time. What I'm getting at here is around the time of acorns dropping is about the time that you need to be in a stand somewhere around an oak tree. Figure out where the oak trees are in your woods.
And the thing I think about that, are they feeding on the acorn during the day because they got more cover? Are they not?
Yes.
What's been your experience?
During the day, they'll only be found out in fields during the night, I've found. And during the day, they're going to take cover around the oak trees.
So they could be bedded within 50 yards of where the acorns are and just get up, have a snack, go back, lay down.
If it's ideal for them, certainly. If it doesn't require them moving much, and if it stays windy, certainly they're going to lay down. Yeah, if they only have to walk 50 yards to their food and their water and their bed, of course they're going to stay right there. What else do they need?
Nothing. Folks, I hope you heard that. So they have food, bedding, and water. That's all deer need. So if your property, you can get all those things in close proximity to each other and minimize the pressure, no matter if you got 10 acres, 5 acres, 40 acres, 100 acres or more, you're going to have deer around because you need all three of those things. And that's a good segue into the Golden Triangle where you hunt along the Ohio River. How long have you been hunting that?
Well, my father has actually been there for about 20 years now, roughly. I started there when I was about 6, like I said. And we actually, it's only 4 people that hunt there. It's myself, my dad, my twin brother, and one other man that has been there as long as my dad. Actually, he may have been there just before my dad. He's actually a very good friend of us. His name is Kerry Perkins. And that man knows more about hunting than I'll probably ever know in my lifetime.
Well, let's get him on the show.
I'll give him your number.
Yeah, let's get him on the show because everybody that comes on the show has some insights that I'd love to share with my listeners all across North America.
We actually just made a walking stick for him in memory of how many deer that he has harvested. It's 163, I believe, but we marked them each on that walking stick and gave it to him. He has a record of each and every deer that he has killed. He has a story for each and every one that he has written out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's a fanatic. But I love him to death. Him and my father have both been a key to my success as well as my brother's.
Let's talk about your buck last year because it's a mature buck. It's a gorgeous deer. And you sent me some trail camera pictures of him. Let's just go back and find out when you first put him on your hit list and how it all came down.
Okay, well, I killed him. He was easily a 5-year-old deer. We watched this deer grow up on trail cams throughout the years. We had only 3 pictures of him, but the most recent that we had before this past year was actually 2 years ago. And at the time, he was 3 years old. So this past year, when we went to collect camera cards, we actually only found 2 more pictures of him. And he was in the same spot every day at around 12 to 2 o'clock. He was coming through, he's strolling through in the middle of the day when, things were slow. And that's actually what I went off of. Given when the rut comes, you're not going to know what those deer are going to do. They don't know what they're hardly doing. They're just chasing tail. But I stuck to that. I got there and stuck around through the middle of the day. I made sure that I was in that stand. And sure enough, he walked through. He was crossing a road from one property to the next. That's why he was so elusive.
So he was coming from the neighbors then?
He was going back and forth. He actually slept in our property, but during the early mornings and evenings, he would go into the other property.
Was he doing that for food? obviously?
Yes, that would be my guess. I actually haven't wandered over into those woods.
All right. So you caught him on the road then? You shot him on the road?
No, he was not on the road. He went about 250 yards past the road is where my stand is. And it's the walk from my car on the road to my stand. And we have like I said, in the bottom, we have a cut road. We cut our roads to our stands and stuff, and we have them marked. That way, when we're going through with a flashlight, we know where our stands are. He was about 250 yards away from the road, but that's just where he was crossing. And he had a giant rub right on the side of the road on our property. So we knew what deer this was. Anyway, I stuck to the cameras, and sure enough, there he was. Dropped him at 2:00. We were chasing him. 3 of us were. Kerry was actually after a different deer that he wound up getting. Congratulations to him. But my father and my twin brother were actually at home at the time, and my older brother, Andrew, he was actually with them. I called them, told my dad what I had done, and I heard a little bit of disbelief in his voice at first, but pictures were a clarification for him. He said, well, I'm on my way. I'll come help. He had to take a look at it.
So you saw the deer. Did you ever really try to hunt him close to his bedding area, or you just knew that you were hunting with a rifle, correct?
Yes, sir. I was with a 270 pump rifle.
So you can shoot that, a couple hundred yards?
Yes, sir. And that's probably about the distance I have to shoot.
So how did you stop them? Because typically I've seen deer when they're moving, and they're darn hard to stop.
Yeah. Well, actually, he was a doe. He had a doe with him that showed up separately, showed up from the opposite direction of him. However, I think they may have been together but split off at one point because there was a big field straight out ahead of me and the road was off to my right. And I think maybe they had split on each side of the field and crossed and were trying to rejoin, and he was going to cross right. He crossed right back across the road to come towards me where he wound up. The doe was about 45, 50 yards away from my stand under an oak tree, and she was eating acorns. And he approached from the opposite side of her, and I let him get behind a tree before I could do anything. This deer was actually blind in one of his eyes for most of his life. And his good eye was facing me when I shot him, in my defense. He had been blind for most of his life, and he was just a smart deer. He was a very smart creature. When he was about 2 years old, he got into a fight, and he came out on the losing end.
But he lived a long time. He lived 3 years.
Lived a long time with that one eye. He was a smart creature, like I said.
Now, why do you think you're pulling big bucks off this property?
Well, I don't know if you've heard of Brown Foreman, the distillery. That's the property area that we're on. It's a darn fertile land. We're in a river bottom. It's shaped, like I said, like you gave the name, the Golden Triangle. It's shaped like a big triangle. It's in a river bottom. And the way this works is I have the river to my back, the Ohio River, and I have large, very steep hills on each side of me that narrow all the way into a point. And we have stands set up actually in a triangle formation. We call it the Triangle of Death. And that's where we tend to harvest most of our bucks. It's because it's such a large bottom that they have to cross when they're going from field to field, property to property. They have to go across that triangle. And typically they're going to walk down that funnel, and that's where we find them. We've been very fortunate to pull some decent deer out of there.
So you get topography that creates a funnel, and then you just set up and you have a lot of pressure on the property. And do you get more of your deer with archery gear or with rifles?
I've got about half of my deer with a bow. However, I own more rifle and firearm accessories than I do archery. I have shot archery for about 9 years. I love to shoot. I tend to do it on my off time whenever I find free time to do something, or I'd stand next to a pond and fish, that one or the other. But I've killed almost half of my deer with a bow, and I shoot Hoyt.
Now, at your age, you said that one gentleman had killed over 100 deer, so you must get multiple deer a year.
He does, yes. He tends to harvest multiple deer. He does a lot of volunteer work for people, and he tends to give to like foundations like homeless and stuff. He goes out and harvests deer and donates the meat.
So how many tags can you get in Kentucky in any given season?
You can kill one buck, but as many does as you want as long as you pay for the tag.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show tonight. Before we go, can I take a moment and say thank you? Listen, as we started the Whitetail Rendezvous podcast journey, we had no idea what to expect. But after 4 years, we received a ton of feedback from our over 400,000 listeners and climbing to 500,000. Speaking of which, we are now closing in on over 600 featured guests. Thank you. And a quick shout out to all those who have left an iTunes review and your feedback. I get those and really appreciate it. And it's awesome to see what you have to say, and we do read every single one of them. And I just want you to know that I am incredibly grateful for your kind words regarding the show. And all of the ratings and reviews help us attract more listeners. And if you're one of those new listeners, welcome. Great to have you. By the way, if you haven't taken the time to rate and review our show and like the Hunting on Private Land strategy on how to get permission to hunt a private property, go to whitetailrendezvous.com as a special gift for just rating and reviewing our show. When you get there, look for the start button to get the details. Listen, I'll share you the top technique from some of the top hunters in the country on how do they get permission to hunt on private land. I'll share with you the exact techniques they use to get permission. As my way of saying thanks for rating and reviewing the show on iTunes. So join us next time. And remember, we're all on this journey together, learning, sharing, and becoming 365 hunters. So it's one buck with a bow, one buck with a rifle, one buck with a muzzleloader, or just one buck?
One buck.
No matter.
You get one buck every year.
Now, if I didn't get a buck during archery season, can I get a buck during gun season?
Yes, sir. It is transferable through any part of the season that you so choose.
Interesting. How much management do you do on the property? Since you only can shoot one buck, you're not going to probably cull many deer. How about for does? How many does do you take?
Well, typically, other than carry, we ourselves, my family doesn't hardly take any does. We leave that up to him because he'll wind up taking 6-7 does. So we let that be it.
So you always got river bottom, you've got a good healthy population of doe, and you get heavy cover. All they need is food. Do you have food plots down there?
No, sir, we don't do any plots. We have a lot of oak trees. We're around the river. It's a large tree farm. So we have plenty of oaks to choose from. We're also surrounded by horse farms, and there's one cornfield in the area. But basically the property, we are a property for deer. We are a deer highway, so to speak.
So they're coming from someplace, going to someplace. You've got red oaks and white oak?
Yes, sir. We're closer to their bedding area. We're closer to their bedding and food source. So we're able to catch them between bedding and their eating.
So a transition zone then?
Yes. Basically, at each hill at the top of this river bottom that I'm hunting is a horse farm on each side. And majority of the property north of us and west of us is owned by the Foreman Distillery heirs. Their whole family, they own thousands of acres in Oldham County, Kentucky. It's kind of ridiculous. They actually just built a tunnel to go onto a bridge across the Ohio River into Indiana. And they built a tunnel underground just because the Foremans told them that they could not do it. They could not build a overpass over the property. So they tunneled under them.
Who did, the state?
The state.
All right.
Fun little fact. So now it's a toll bridge. So they're getting their money back on that. So we are surrounded by horse farms. We're in just a big bottom, a transition zone is what you called it, catching them from their bedding to food. And we set up every year by relocating stands based upon their tendencies, whether their sources of food changes. Some years acorns drop from a oak tree. Some years they don't. I'm not sure if you're too particular with oak trees or not. Some years they will drop. Some years they won't. So that changes, and we change depending on that, along with signs of scrapes and other sorts.
Now, how do you know if the oak tree is going to bear fruit?
You won't. Well, I personally do not know. I am not that scientific about it. Basically, I went off of one tree in particular. Whenever I was hanging a stand, one year they dropped, next year they didn't. And they didn't for the next 2 years, I believe. and then they dropped again. So I've actually set up closer to other oak trees as well, and I've noticed it from those trees as well.
So you better keep a journal on what trees are dropping and where they are in the cycle. I'm serious. Because that would be frustrating. Last year, it was a great place, and you harvested deer, you go back, and there ain't nowhere to be found because there's no food.
Gosh, I'd like to shake the man's hand who'd be willing to keep that journal. That's a lot of thought going into it.
Well, yeah.
But if I could keep track of something like that, I'm sure I would, if I had found it very useful to myself.
Well, yeah, just put up number 1 through how many oak trees and just start putting it on a computer and put a program up.
Number them. Spreadsheet it.
Spreadsheet, and away you go.
There you go. You're on track. But I feel like it would take a lot of time to get the information of how long each one would take to drop.
Well, that's observation. But the thing is, when they're dropping, you want to be hunting, not looking for trees dropping.
You're right. That's right.
I don't know. Alex, this has been great. And how can people find you on social media if they have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I have a Twitter and Instagram. I no longer have a Facebook. My Instagram is Burke, Burke 02, and that is my tag for Instagram. My Twitter handle is Alex_Burke15.
All right, folks,
and
you got that.
You will find more outdoor posts on my Instagram than you will Twitter.
All right. Well, folks, it's been just a pleasure visiting with Alex this afternoon. And on behalf of all the listeners for Whitetail Rendezvous, you gave us some insights, and I certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, Bruce. It was actually a really good time. I've actually not been too experienced in podcasts, and this is my first one. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.